Welcome to Proline TV here on this Tuesday, February the 25th. Kevin Rogers with you, and a new video we're going to be bringing you a few times a week. We'll be focusing on NHL first period trends and best bets. Usually save these for the nights where there's a lot of games, and usually on Tuesdays and Thursdays, there's a lot of games. So we're going to get right to it. And what I have done throughout this season has I've tracked all the first periods for every team in the NHL. So instead of just giving you some of these trends, I'm going to show you the trends. I have a Google sheet that I have accumulated throughout the season. And if it's something that you are interested in looking at, you see my Twitter handle at the bottom, at Rogers Picks. Just DM me there and I can give you access to it. So without any further ado, let's get right to the games for this evening. And we'll start with, well, first of all, here's the sheet where it goes through every single team's records in the first period, their over under in the first, and also you can't really see it on the screen, but BTTS, both teams to score in the first period. But we'll concentrate mostly on the straight up and over under records. And we will begin with Carolina at Montreal. And you see with Carolina that they've had their struggles in the first period on the road this season, 11, 14, and 4. Also, a lot of unders with them, too, at 10 and 19 in the opening period. Meanwhile, for Montreal, it's been a struggle to say the least. Not so much at home, 9, 8, and 12. On the road, just 3, 16, and 9. But they are actually coming off a game in which they won in the first period on the road at Ottawa back on Saturday. So a very rare occurrence for them. Now, taking a look at the Carolina Hurricanes and what they've done recently, they were just blown out by Toronto, allowing 4 goals in the first period. And you see now 6 straight games that Carolina has allowed a goal in the opening frame. So maybe something to keep note of. Meanwhile, for Montreal, same thing there. 5 straight games they've allowed a goal. So the over could be definitely worth a look there in the first period. And going to assume that Sam Montembeault is going to get the start for the Canadians tonight. So maybe look at that as a first period play, the over between Montreal and Carolina. And really, it's around 130 or so. You lay 130 in the first period. So it really isn't that big of a risk. Now, taking a look at the second game of the night, Anaheim is at Buffalo, and Anaheim continuing their road trip here. They won at Boston, scored 2 goals in the first period back on Saturday, but then blown out early at Detroit. They came back to tie the game, lost in overtime to the Red Wings. Now they're wrapping up their road trip against Buffalo. And what I found interesting, too, with this game is Anaheim, at the end of road trips, they play low-scoring games. 1-0 against Calgary, 0-0 against Florida. They trailed Edmonton 1-0. They trailed Vegas 1-0. Now, looking at the sheet, just to tell you home or road, if the date is colored, then it is a home game. If it's in white, it's a road game. So that's how you tell the difference between the home and the road there. And in this column, C is the first period results. D is the line in the first period for that team. E is the final score for the game. F is the starting goalie for that game. And G is the first period total for that game. H is the shots on goal in the first period. And I is the power play and penalty kill numbers in the first period. So hopefully you got all of that. And as we do this, you'll get more used to it. And again, if you are interested in access to the sheet, you can just DM me at Rogers Picks on Twitter. So Anaheim coming off back-to-back overs in the last 2 games. This number I want to show you, which is very interesting with the Buffalo Sabres, that Buffalo 27, 13, and 15 in the first period, 17, 4, and 7 at home. So Buffalo has not been a great team overall, but in the first period, they've been really good this year. And also from a total standpoint, 35 and 20 to the over in the opening period. Now, going down to Buffalo and seeing what they did on Saturday, 5 goals against the Rangers in the first period. And that, you see the 8-2 blowout against the Rangers that they've had a lot of high-scoring games of late, and that's now what, a 6-1 overrun in the last 7 games for Buffalo. So we'll see if that keeps up tonight. Now, taking a look at the next game, Calgary is at Washington. First with the Flames. Now they're going out east for several games. Tampa Bay coming up Thursday. They'll play the Panthers, and Florida coming up on Saturday. But the Flames, though, they finished the first half with 3 consecutive unders and a lot of unders at home before they hit the over against San Jose on Sunday night, with that being a 1-1 game in the opening period. Also, Calgary looking to avenge a 1-0 loss to Washington, which you see there on January 28th at home, or 1-0 in the first period. They lost the game 3-1, but a low-scoring game early, and they end up losing that game in spite of outshooting them 13-5 in the first period. The Capitals, look at what they've done the last 2 games. They beat up Pittsburgh 8-3. They beat Edmonton 7-3, but also very high-scoring first periods, 6 straight overs for them, and especially at home, allowing 2 against Winnipeg, 1 against Florida, 3 against Utah before the break, and then 1 against Edmonton on Sunday. So you wonder if that's going to be another overplay between the Capitals and the Flames when they meet tonight. The Stars and the Blue Jackets are in Columbus, and Dallas has been very good in the first period of late. And you see, since the Four Nations break, they've not allowed a goal in the opening period, beating the Devils and Islanders on the road. They've been away for a long time. And Dallas did beat Columbus 5-3 back on February 2nd at home. In fact, their last home game. And they have a big home game coming up against the Kings on Friday. But the Stars, though, playing a little better in the first period after allowing a goal in 4 straight before the break. Now, looking at Columbus, they've actually been one of the better teams in the first period. Before we go to their team page, Columbus 27, 12, and 18 in the first period this year, 15, 5, and 8. They've only trailed 5 times in 28 home games after the first period. So that's pretty impressive. Also 20 and 8 to the over in the first period so far on the season. Now, when you look at Columbus's numbers, just beating Chicago, that was a big win for them. They ended the first half on a bit of a cold streak, dropping 4 in a row. But taking a look at Columbus and what they've done overall in the first period, since January 4th, they only trailed 1 time after the first period, and that came at Buffalo on February the 4th. So they've been a really good team in the first period. And yes, there's been a lot of ties there, but also Columbus listed as an underdog tonight at home against Dallas. Now, the next game, a big one in the Atlantic, Boston has been terrible. They're hosting Toronto. And a couple numbers here on this one. Maple Leafs are favored at home. 3 straight losses for the Bruins heading in. They got in that 2-0 hole against Anaheim back on Saturday. They came back, they tied it, and they ended up losing in overtime. But here are the numbers against Toronto. Here's something interesting this year. They've had 3 unders in the first period, trailed 1-0 on January 4th, lost that game, a high-scoring game, 6-4. Before that, scoreless back on November 5th through 1 period, lost that game 4-0. Scoreless in the first period, won 4-3 in overtime. So we've seen 2 of those 3 games go over for the game, but all 3 actually went under in the first period. So you kind of wonder if that trend is going to change coming up this evening. And looking at the Maple Leafs off that big first period against Carolina back on Saturday, they've been terrible with rest, or without rest, this season. And they trailed Chicago 1-0 through 1. Look at that. They were laying 210 in the opening period, and Chicago got the money there, but Toronto came back and won that game 5-2. And Toronto, even though this doesn't apply tonight, for days rest, they are 3-7-1 with no rest. I had to pull up that number I didn't have off the top of my head. 3-7-1 with no rest. So think about that moving forward with Toronto in the first period, that they struggle out of the gate. Now, it doesn't apply tonight because they've had a day off, but just moving forward, that Toronto's had issues in the first period when they're playing with no rest. But again, up and down for Toronto when you look at it. They trailed after the first, tie, trailed after the first, led, trailed after the first, led, trailed after the first, led. So maybe the trend will say Toronto will lead after the first period after they have a period in which, or first period in which they are trailing. The Battle of Pennsylvania tonight, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, kind of an odd scheduling spot. Look at this. So the Flyers and the Penguins met right before the Four Nations break, and the Penguins lost at home to the Flyers 3-2. They play them, the two teams play again tonight in Philadelphia. Then they play again in Pittsburgh on Thursday. So 3 meetings this month between these teams. And first, looking at the Penguins, 2 losses already at home after the break. They had this huge under streak, too. This went back, 7 straight unders in the first period going into the Four Nations break. And they had the final 2 games that Sidney Crosby did not play. Obviously, he's back because he's playing the Four Nations, and he's back in the lineup for the Penguins. And the last 2 games, we've seen overs. And also, the Penguins and Flyers went under last time. You wonder if this one will flip and go over this time. That's now 5 straight games that the Penguins have allowed a goal in the first period. Now, looking at the Flyers and seeing what they've done, they had a rally past Edmonton in Saturday's 6-3 win. They trailed early in that one, had a big second period, and the Flyers trying to put something together. Again, their season's kind of shot, but trying to at least get a little bit of momentum. They went through, you see that from January 27th through February 8th. They allowed 1 goal in the first period in a 7-game stretch, and they gave up 2 to Edmonton in Saturday's win. So, again, what was hard going into the first games on Saturday, you had a lot of high-scoring games. These teams coming back from a 2-week break, which they don't normally get. So I still believe let these teams play a game or 2 to kind of get a little more of a rhythm. And that's what made it hard, I think, on Saturday for people if they lost in the NHL, that trying to jump out and seeing what these teams, you have a lot of players that A, were off for 2 weeks, or B, the ones that played in the Four Nations. And now they're just trying to acclimate themselves back to this play, especially if you played on Canada or United States in that big game last Thursday, and then trying to come down from that. But the Flyers and the Penguins, that should be an interesting game tonight when they meet in Philadelphia. The Oilers and the Lightning are in Tampa tonight, and the Oilers, they have a big game against the Panthers coming up on Thursday in the Stanley Cup rematch. But first tonight against Tampa Bay, trying to bounce back from the 2 losses already at Philadelphia and at Washington, allowing 13 goals. He gave 5 to Colorado before that. So really, it's been a pretty lackluster defensive showing. But also Edmonton, when you look at what they've done on the road, first period totals, 2-0 right there. Yes, they had the 2 scoreless games against St. Louis and Chicago. But before that, these 3 went over: Minnesota, Colorado, Vancouver, Chicago, Pittsburgh. You had the 1 under against Boston, Seattle, Anaheim, LA. This team had a major road over streak in the first period before it let up a little bit before the Four Nations break, and now it's on track against Philadelphia and Washington. But the first time they played Tampa Bay, that was a 2-1 game back on December 10th in Edmonton, and that was 1-0 through 1. So, again, you see now if things will go the opposite way between these teams. Looking at the Lightning, and you'll see Andrei Vasilevsky, I'm sure, in net tonight. But the Lightning had that scoreless first period against Seattle back on Sunday before blowing that thing open. They've won 5 straight, Tampa Bay. And look at the home numbers, though. This is going to be a tough one. This one you may have to pass on because Edmonton has been really good scoring team on the road in the first period, where Tampa Bay, you look at this, that's now 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 straight unders in the first period for Tampa Bay. So you have one team on an under streak in the first period, another one on an over streak. May have to be a pass when it's all said and done. The Rangers and the Islanders battle in New York as they hook up this evening on Long Island. And a couple of overs the last few games for the Rangers. They had that terrible first period against Buffalo on Saturday. They did bounce back and beat Pittsburgh on Sunday, but still now 3 straight overs for the Rangers in the first period. But in the last, 9 games, they've led once after the first period. That came against Pittsburgh when Crosby didn't play on February 7th. Now, looking at the New York Islanders, it's been up and down for them as well in the first period. Not really a great scoring team in the first, when you see a lot of those zeros there. And they were blanked by Dallas in the first period on Sunday, lost that game 4-3. So don't have a great feel for this game between the Rangers and the Islanders. Panthers and the Predators tonight in Nashville, and the Panthers still without Matthew Tkachuk. He is sidelined, and back-to-back unders for the Panthers in the first period, also not scoring a goal in the first period in the last two games. They did blow things open against Ottawa in that last game before the break, and against Seattle just couldn't get the offense going, and they had a lot of guys playing that Four Nations tournament. So you kind of wonder if you had that letdown there against the Kraken. As far as Nashville goes, 2 straight games at home, they have not scored in the first. They've been a really good team at home in the first period. They went before that New Jersey game, 18 home games they trailed one time through the first period in the last 18 home games prior to the Devils' loss on Sunday. And you see here this homestand with the Panthers tonight, Winnipeg. So it's not going to be easy for Nashville. And also they're on this streak now of 9 straight games. They have not led after the first period. So tread lightly with the Predators tonight as they host the Panthers. 3 more games to get to. A lot of games tonight. Detroit is at Minnesota. They just played right before the break, February 22nd in Detroit. And the Red Wings led 1-0 after 1. They lost that game in overtime. They actually snapped a 6-game over streak. Now you see 7 of the last 8 in the first period for Minnesota, or for Detroit rather. They've gone over the total in the first period. Now, as far as the Wild goes, they are going the other way, where they are on an under streak. That's 5-1 to the under in the last 6 games, and you see they've struggled to score in the first period. So we'll see how that one turns out. The Kraken and the Blues in St. Louis, and for Seattle, they have had their struggles in the first period of late. They've only scored 2 first-period goals in the last 6 games. They're on an under streak now of 3 in a row, but they haven't allowed a goal in the first period in the last 3, so that's pretty good. Now, as far as St. Louis goes, they have not been good in the first period. That is now, what is that? 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 of the last 10 they've trailed, or they just haven't led, I should say, after the first. They did come back and beat Colorado on Sunday, but still they've allowed a goal in the first period now in 4 straight games. And also, even at home, that is, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 in a row, they haven't led after the first period at home. So that's really been a struggle for the Blues. And when these teams played earlier this season, it was scoreless in the first in that afternoon game in Seattle, which kicked off the season. And Seattle's been on a nice little streak with unders. St. Louis has been bad at home in the first period. Final game, the Blackhawks and the Hockey Club of Utah. First, we'll start with Utah. And they went through a nice under streak there before the break. They hit a couple overs on the road, but at home, that's amazing. 4 straight scoreless, or I should say 4 straight games that Utah has not scored a goal in the opening period at home. And that game was juiced to the under in the first period against Vancouver on Sunday, which they ended up winning 2-1. You see it was under -120 in the first period, but Utah has had problems scoring in the first period. When they played Chicago in the opener, they scored 2 goals in the first period. That was their debut there in Salt Lake City. As far as Chicago goes, the Blackhawks, again, off back-to-back unders against Columbus and Toronto. Chicago was a bad first-period team last year, but so far this season, just going back to this page, 22, 20, and 15. Not bad for the Blackhawks, considering they're a last-place team. They got a lot of rebuilding to do. They do have a star in Connor Bedard, but look at this, though, with their first period at home versus the road. 21-7 over at home, 13-15 on the road. So you kind of wonder there, the goal scoring goes down a little bit in the first period when these teams play. So with all of that being said, I'm back with you. And we have 2 best bets for tonight. With everything out there, 2 best bets. We're going to give them to you. Number 1, the Ducks and the Sabres. I'm going under in the first period. You say, well, Buffalo's been a really good over team in the first period, but still, after Buffalo scored 5 against the Rangers, I don't think we're going to see that kind of breakout again. And after Anaheim struggled in the first period against Detroit, I think that they're going to get it back on track. They're on back-to-back overs the first two games out of the gate. I think that one, take the plus money with the Ducks and the Sabres. Now, the next one we will do will be the Blue Jackets at home against Dallas. And Dallas has been really good in the first period of late, but also Columbus. I can't deny what they have done at home in the first period, or just overall, but also at home. They've been very good. And we're going to take Columbus as our second best bet tonight for the NHL first periods. All right. Hopefully, you got a bit of an education on the first period, on some trends, on some things going on, in case you're just kind of plugging back into the NHL after the Four Nations break. Again, if you are interested in access those Google Sheets, you want to take a look at first period stats. You see my Twitter handle at the bottom, at Rogers Picks. Just DM me, and I will give you access to those picks. And you can study them for yourself and take a look and see if you can find some angles to probably win in the first period in the NHL. Again, I am Kevin Rogers. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching on Proline TV. Don't forget to like this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Proline TV on YouTube. And we'll check back with you on Thursday for more trends and picks for NHL first period plays. Again, I am Kevin Rogers. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, best of luck with your bets.